Welcome back. All right, so there are a few things I've wanted to talk about lately, and I figured, well, I can organize it into a top 10 list. I figure this is as good a time as any while we're waiting to see what's going on with Dubois, what's going on, is Krug going to wait, what's going to happen. So while there's a lot of things going on in the NHL, and we're waiting for a bunch of others, and I'm wearing one of the jerseys with my name on it. So if you're wondering, this is the new Canucks skate jersey. It's fantastic. Anyways, that being said, there's 10 items I wanted to talk about, and I've thought about various ways to do videos on this topic, but I thought, I'll just kind of throw it all into one and hope the whole thing works as a video. So there's 10 items I wanted to talk about. I also wanted to add at the bottom, everything the NHL does seems to be last minute. I saw somebody asking about why the RFAs, why don't they deal with this sooner? Yeah, the NHL tends to do that. It does feel like with the National Hockey League, and I've complained about this with the collective bargaining agreement, that until there's that ticking clock, they don't seem to care. It's one thing that drives me nuts with TV and movies is everything always seems to be solved with 1 second left on the clock. What if that clock on that bomb is wrong? What if it's off by 2 seconds? You're done. So, anyways, smartest thing a villain in a movie could do is make it so that it'll blow up at 2 seconds, because then it's going to work every single time. But anyways, it does feel like for the NHL they need that. They need that. We've only got a few minutes. Just get it done. And it seems that way with CBA, with contracts, and with sometimes with trades too, where we know a player needs to be traded, and it takes till that very last minute. They're like, this is the best we could do. Well, maybe. But anyways, that being said, I figured to throw that at the bottom. I want to start with number one, and this is something that I've really said over the last few years. It feels like more than I used to. We get enamored with a name. So we'll hear that somebody's available either with free agency that's coming up on the first or available for trade. And it's like, okay, I want my team to pick up that player. And it's for the name. So we look at the stats, and maybe the stats weren't good last year. And we say, well, the stats weren't good, but I know he can bounce back and he's really good. That bounce back isn't guaranteed, and it's important to look at the stats. And sometimes I think GMs do this too, where they'll go out and get a big name player and go, there you go, see, we fixed this problem. It doesn't feel like that happens as much now as it used to. Back before the salary cap, and especially when players were being paid in their mid-late 30s, the way now players are paid in their early 20s, there were unrealistic expectations of bounce backs for veterans that just weren't going to happen. Second, and I've said this a bunch of times, cap space is gold. It is absolutely gold, and there are a lot of GMs at this time of year that drive me crazy because they make sure that they spend every single last cent of what's on the cap. And I think, and it's not on the board, but one thing to keep in mind is that you can pay your big names some serious cash, but you need to make sure too that your support guys are paid a reasonable amount. So for teams that are very generous with their bottom six forwards and very generous with the bottom two defensemen, they may have a hard time with the cap going forward because other teams find more economical solutions when it comes to the depth up front and the depth on the blue line. Cap space is very, very important, and you will see GMs over the next week that really don't plan it out, or they're already out of cap space. Teams that have a ton right now, a week from now, we're going to be saying, so they're over the cap, they're going to need LTIR. Which brings me to three, which is free agent fixes are really only part of the plan here. So this year's free agent class isn't great, which means that more teams are looking to trade, which I think is awesome. I think it's nice to see trades being made. There are always going to be those made just for cap reasons, but it feels like this year there's actually trades that are going to happen for hockey reasons. So that's good. And free agency, there's times where a team will go out and sign two or three free agents and then kind of sit the rest of the summer. And it is only part of the picture. The smart GM will go out and they'll pick up a couple of guys, sure, but they'll make sure that they fit with the roster, and they'll make sure the rest of the roster is filled out around them. So yeah, free agency fixes I know we'll see a lot of after July 1st. I'm really excited my team did this, but without all the right players. Plus, you never know how that chemistry is going to work out with that new free agent on that team, right? Sometimes it's automatic, they're great, everything's great. Sometimes it takes them a little while to adjust, and in some cases they really don't, and they end up leaving. Production drops in your early 30s. This is something that absolutely is a thing. There are some general managers still signing guys who are 29, 30 years of age to long-term contracts, and there's risk to that. Now, I think there's less risk when it's a two-way forward. I think there's less risk when it's a two-way defenseman as well. But when their game is offense and they're being paid for goals and for the offense, those are the contracts that don't age well. And also you have to watch that when a player's 29 or 30 years of age and they just had the best year in their career, the odds of them repeating that, not great. So that's something else too that I think most GMs have gotten wise to. But there may be a couple of contracts that get signed here this summer that are a little bit of a head scratcher because it's like, well, he's a good player, but the time that contract ends, he's going to be 37, and that cap hit, can you move it? That kind of thing, right? So that discussion we have all the time. Also, teams shouldn't overcorrect. One thing that drives me insane, and just from a Canuck perspective, after they lost in the final in 2011, they decided, well, we're going to have to get tougher. We're going to have to, really amp up the physicality in our lineup. So they tried, and then during the regular season, they beat Boston in 2012. Great, fine, perfect. And then they lost in the first round of the playoffs, and it's been kind of a disaster ever since. So don't overcorrect. Don't go out and change your roster. And when I see things about Toronto, is that, for instance, with me, my number one thing with Toronto is if they overcorrect, it's going to fall apart quickly, right? And it is that maddening area where your team is close, but they're just not getting over the hump. They're not winning in the playoffs, so what do? And the trick is not overcorrecting, but making the right changes. Keeping in mind, number 6 on the board, puck control is king. The most interesting thing to me this year, and I know that this is something that's been preached, that the advanced stats community's been talking a lot about, these guys are good at your zone exits and your zone entries, and they talk a lot about, passing and all of this, and all of the advanced stats on who's really good at generating play and not giving up the puck or, forcing those turnovers. And it does feel like now puck control is king. So if your team gives up turnovers, you're probably going to lose those games, right? And I say that because it does feel like the imbalance in the league between, I would say, all 16 teams that made the playoffs in terms of talent, it's not where it used to be. It used to be you would see one team go out there, they could roll 4 lines and 6 defensemen, and they'd be matched up in the playoffs with a team that barely made it, and they might have 2 good lines. They might have a couple of really good defensemen, but you can tell they're really up against it. It doesn't feel like that's the case now. When you're looking at matchups between teams, they match up pretty evenly. So that team that's not turning over the puck, much more likely to win in today's game now than I think 20 years ago. And really because of the fact that these teams are pretty even, and when you're looking at the talent level, you have to play kind of a perfect game. You absolutely have to play a perfect game. One thing that's interesting to me is that contracts always seem to be, now there's exceptions, but it seems like you have your bridge deal, which is 1 year, 2 years, sometimes 3, but usually if it's a bridge deal, it's 1 or 2 year, or you have your long-term 7 or 8 year contracts. And I've done videos on the long-term contracts, and now in most cases they work out pretty well. There are the exceptions. Those exceptions get talked about a lot, but in most cases the long-term extensions work out pretty well. But it is interesting to me now that guys are getting 7 or 8 year deals that never would have been considered for an extension of that length. Again, if you look back pre-salary cap era. And I'm a proponent of 4 year contracts. I don't think there's a problem with 4 years. I think 4 years is a nice, long, decent chunk of time. But now, the players, they want that certainty of being where they are. And for the teams themselves, they want to make sure that they have no worries about the cap going forward. So you sign the guy to an 8 year contract, that cap hit. To me personally, I loved 4 year deals, but they've really gone the way of the dodo. So it's fine. It is what it is. But yeah, the 4 year deals, I miss them. I don't know what else to say. Now, if a guy signs a 4 year contract, the first thing you hear is, well, clearly he doesn't want to be there because he's only going to be there for 4 years. Okay, that's an interesting way of looking at it. But to me, if you're willing to stay somewhere for 4 or more years than that, you're probably okay being there. But yeah, I understand why they went to the 8 year contract. Players seem to be in right now. We have Torrey Krug holding up a trade to the Flyers. But players seem to be exercising more control over where they go. And earlier in their careers, it feels like there's a lot of restricted free agents that are now deciding, I don't want to be here. And that's new. That's different. And really, because we're looking at a league that, and again, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago, that up until you were 31 years of age, you were with the team that drafted you. unless you pulled a Lindros and you just decided I'm absolutely not being there, or you were willing to sit out when you had a contract to force a trade, which of course players don't do anymore, but they used to, and boy, it made you unpopular with the fan base really quickly, and probably with your teammates too. You're being paid and you're not there. But yeah, players seem to be exercising greater control, and just I'm not playing here. And every year it feels like it's different. So right now it's Winnipeg, it's Calgary that have got a lot of this, but we've seen it with Buffalo. We're seeing it with Philly, of course, with Krug not wanting to go there, and I would imagine there's other players too. We've heard those rumors about Columbus, that players don't want to be in Columbus. I've been a Vancouver fan long enough to know there's at least 3 different times in their history while I've been watching them where players were rumored to not want to go to Vancouver, that it was a disaster. I remember when there was a time Toronto was on the no trade list very often. Early 80s when there was the uncertainty around the Blues, definitely at certain points with the Penguins, it cycles. And it does feel like right now there are certain teams players are allergic to signing with. But if you look at some of those teams too, and including Calgary and Winnipeg in this picture, there are players there on long-term deals. So it's not everybody wants out. It kind of gets overblown. It's just, it doesn't look great right now because of who does want out. But it's a matter of bringing in guys who want to be there. Which brings me to number 9, and I think this one makes some sense. And again, when I was putting this together, one would kind of remind me of the next. Loyalty versus winning. So we saw the Vegas Golden Knights win the Stanley Cup. In part because loyalty to them is important to certain players. So the original Misfits, absolutely, they are loyal to the original Misfits. And those Misfits, and that being Carlson, Riley Smith, Marchessault, Theodore, McNabb, these guys haven't looked for the most money they can get. They have been totally willing to take maybe a little bit less to play for the Vegas Golden Knights. And Vegas has rewarded them by putting together a team that's won a Stanley Cup. So there has to be that balance. And I know, and again, I'll mention this from a Vancouver perspective. I apologize for that. But before the channel, obviously, as a Canuck fan, I remember when they re-signed the Sedins and the amount of money that went to them. And I love the Sedins. And I thought, if they really wanted to shake things up, they would have $12 million in cap space going into the summer. And who knows what you can do with that. But I understand. I understand the concern about, well, if you'd let the Sedins go, what else might have happened? And totally, absolutely agree. But it's an interesting topic to me, the idea of, so can you let that core player of your team go and decide you're going to take that cap space, which is gold, as I've said, and use it to improve another part of the roster? Vegas was not shy about that. Pacioretty out the door, and they go out and they find somebody else. And it worked out all right. Eichel ends up being pretty good in the playoffs. And the other thing, too, that I wanted to throw into this video is the rush to give up on young players. One of my favorite things, just with the channel and just watching as time goes by, a team will draft a player, and that fan base will be like, we love this guy. We are so happy we drafted this guy. This guy's awesome. A year into his development, it might be, well, he hasn't debuted yet, but the numbers are still okay. And then he makes his debut, whether it's in year 2, year 3, or whenever, and he has a hard time. He's a young player. He's having a hard time learning the National Hockey League game. Maybe he's from a European nation, English isn't his first language. He's having to adjust to a new culture. He's going through a lot, right? And it's a lot to take in, and sometimes it takes a while to get your feet under you. And then the comments will be, this guy sucks, he needs to go. He can't skate, he can't play, we don't like him here. So I always get a kick out of how quickly people will turn on the young kids. And it doesn't matter if they're injured. If they miss time with injury, the matter. People will be like, oh, the guy's a bum. What's wrong with him? I don't know. He broke his leg last year. It's taken him a while to get back into. I don't care. That's stupid. They should trade him. They should ditch him. It is one of my favorite things with fans is seeing how quickly they'll go from I love this guy to he's a bum. He's got to go. And then, sure enough, when that player starts to figure things out and play well, then it's, I never lost faith. I knew he could turn it around. So it's one of those things, and giving up on young players can be very dangerous. We saw Nashville this past year, Ellie Tolvanen, they move him through waivers, and most teams passed on Tolvanen on waivers. Seattle went, this could work for us. And he did. He worked very well for the Seattle Kraken. He fit right into the lineup. So for Nashville, did they give up on Tolvanen too soon? there's a combination of yes, and then you need to look at how he's fit into the Seattle lineup and why couldn't Nashville have done the same thing. So when I see the rush to give up on anybody who's 20, 21, 22 right now, I do find it humorous because they're very young. Very, very young. I just can't imagine going to a job and at 22 years of age having somebody go, yeah, we've decided you don't belong here. And I know it's different. I know it's different. But when it's a career that they're like, yeah, this career isn't for you, I don't buy that. And again, with players, especially as rookies, I don't care. They can have a really bad rookie season because they could have a very good career after that, and vice versa. There are players who come into the league and they have a fantastic rookie season, and then things go kind of quiet, and before you know it, they're out of the league. So yeah, I figured, you know what, these are 10 things that have been on my mind lately, and I'd go ahead and make a little video and share it with you fine people on the internet. Who knows? Maybe while I was filming this, stuff has happened and we've got trades to report, because that's what I'm waiting on, is some trades to report as we get closer to the draft on Wednesday. And then, of course, we have free agency on Saturday, next Saturday, which is why I'm having another meetup on Sunday rather than on Saturday, because Saturday is going to be a very busy day. But Sunday I can head out to Coquitlam and play some street hockey. Sure, why not? All right, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. And if you have something you've noticed with hockey fans, with hockey GMs, this kind of thing, just general topics during the summer, let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.